Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share a recent conversation with two students in our Executive MBA class of 2025, Annie McCormick and Sydney Stoops. I recently talked with Annie and Sydney about their MBA journeys, their decision to pursue an MBA, what led them to Darden, how they thought through the decision, the impact of their experience at Darden, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the ExecMBA podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Annie McCormick and Sydney Stoops. Annie, Sydney, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Brett.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Brett.
It's great to have you here. Annie, how's everything going? How are you doing?
I'm feeling great, Brett, because we're down the home stretch. Next week, we will sashay across the stage. So it's been a very challenging and rewarding journey, but I'm very, very excited for the grand finale with our cohort next weekend.
Yeah, Sydney, how does it feel to be done? I mean, LR2's in your rearview mirror. All that's left is graduation at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely mixed emotions. Looking forward to getting those, 20 to 30 hours back a week. But I'm certainly going to miss seeing the cohort once a month. So if I could live on an attorney residencies where I'm not paying for my hotel room and just hanging out with an awesome cohort, that would be great. But no, it's weird. I've been reflecting a lot on it, and it's in some sense, it's been a long 2 years. It's a hard 2 years. It's by no means easy, but I also feel like it went by in the blink of an eye. And I actually can't believe we're already like a week away from graduation. So it's exciting, but sentimental. I'm going to miss everyone. I hope we can all stay in touch.
Yeah, well, I've always found that it's a time of a lot of mixed emotions for people. There's excitement to be done, but also kind of a bittersweet aspect to be at the end of the program, just given the connections people make, the relationships they form, the experience of being able to go to class and learn and develop in this kind of way. It's not that easy to find out there in the real world. So Sydney, tell us just a little bit more about who you are and what's your background.
Yeah, so my background, so I'm a PhD by training. Right after undergrad, I actually went and did my PhD in pharmacology, where I focused on cancer drug discovery research and did a postdoc focusing on cancer diagnostics. So I'm very much in the oncology space, even in my current role. But somewhere along the way, after a long bit of education and stint as a staff scientist, I decided, I was kind of done doing lab research and wanted to transition into the pharmaceutical industry where I am now. And so I spent the first 6 years at my company in medical affairs, which is very aligned with, scientific education, clinical development education, and having those more complex scientific conversations, which was in line with my PhD, and really started to think about an MBA just because I wanted to better understand the commercial side of the organization and the strategic decisions that are being made on that side. So sort of in my ideal world, my plan was very comfortable in medical affairs, was going to start the MBA and then leverage the MBA to pivot into or onto the commercial side of the organization. But an opportunity opened up in our product strategy group right before, or I guess the year of starting the MBA program. So in, the fall of 2022, I'd already gotten into Darden. And I just felt like I couldn't pass up on that opportunity waiting for me to complete an MBA. So I applied and made the transition in January of 2023 to product strategy. So I was doing the MBA at the same time I was learning product strategy, which has made it for a very interesting and sleepless 2 years. But it's also been great because I've been able to pull through my learnings in class directly into my role. And I think it's really helped accelerate my understanding and learning of product strategy and the commercial side of the organization.
What led you to Darden specifically?
Yeah, so I can't, a couple different reasons. At the time I lived in Richmond, so was certainly looking geographically. I'm married. My husband had a demanding career and still does. We have 2 small children. So, understanding I wanted to do a hybrid program that had a live component because I think personal connection is important. looked within like a radius, I guess, if you will, of Richmond. So did apply to Dart and a couple other schools that are conveniently located. And then when I got in, I know, Brett, I had reached out to you and said that, being in the pharmaceutical industry, I feel like we're a very minority group of people in MBA programs, especially in executive MBA programs, and asked if there was anyone in one of the other classes I could speak to just to get an idea of how they're handling the MBA and sort of what they're getting out of it and how they're planning to use it for their professional experience and their careers. And so you connected me with someone in the class above, and we had like an hour-long conversation. And I really appreciated his positive experience at Darden, as well as the focus being on more of a collaborative environment versus a competitive environment. Competition is good, certainly, but I feel like in my point in my career and specifically pursuing an executive MBA, I wanted to have classmates that I felt were more collaborative and less competitive towards. And so I had gotten more competitive vibes from some of the other schools I had gotten into, and just felt like, based off of my conversation with the 24 classmate, that Darden would have been a good fit. And I feel like it's exceeded my expectations as far as the relationships and the connections I've made in the class.
Yeah, the case method, I think if you just think about the learning experience here, it doesn't really work if you're not a collaborative person. You have to be curious about the other people in the room, see that you have something to learn from them, feel like you have something to add to the conversation, but you also have a lot to take away from the conversation. Annie, tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you and what's your background?
Well, let's start with, I'm a Pisces. I'm a mom of two, and I work for the past decade plus. I've worked at Sands Capital Management, which is located right here in Roslyn, a global asset management firm focused on growth equity investing. I really enjoyed it. I serve as a director of client service, and we might talk about it later, but I'm considered a climber trying to advance my career at Sands Capital. But for my MBA journey, I really wanted to do a residential program about a decade ago. And I feel like there were twists and turns with life and kind of put it off. And some of it's, having guilt and focusing on myself. But I was really maybe towards where we saw the light at the end of the tunnel during the pandemic. And I just had my second daughter, and I was determined to kind of do something for myself, and just had heard a lot of great things about Darden through coworkers and other friends of friends. And with the proximity to where I work and knowing that having a young family, being able to get home if I need to, we have a lot of people in our cohort who are hopping on planes every month. And that seems exhausting on its own. So the proximity, the reputation, the case study method, and just some of the people I had met through the recruiting process really kind of sealed the deal for me when it came to Darden.
What I think is important for our listeners to know is two of you actually reached out and said, we want to be on the podcast. We want to share our story, kind of our collective story together. So Annie, how did you and Sydney get connected? How did y'all meet?
Oh, I love this story. We can talk about our meet cute. Brett, we attended a nationals game that was organized by you and others at Darden. And it was a few weeks before school had officially started. And as a geriatric millennial, it's a little bit tough to make new friends. It's kind of a daunting thing when you're thinking about going back to school, and gosh, you're gonna have to build new relationships and put yourself out there. So I was determined to go to this game on my own and make one friend. That was the goal. So we got to the game, and I see Sydney there with her adorable family. She had two sons around the same age as my daughters. And I found my target, and after some light stalking, I did go up to Sydney and introduce myself, and we became quick friends. We had, messaged each other. It felt like a first date. It's like, what do you say to someone that you're just meeting, you're trying to befriend? But it was nice because heading into our first leadership residency, I had met Sydney. We were able to connect on that first day and have been great friends throughout the program. So I really, really, really appreciated her friendship and support through this journey, and some laughs along the way. Right, Sydney?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. I remember, I think I was telling Annie this last week that when we went back to the hotel after the game, like, we already had a WhatsApp group going for our class, and I found Annie's name in there, and I'm like asking my husband, like, is it creepy? Do I send her a text message? What do I say? Do I say, hey, so nice to meet a fellow mom? And it's just, to Annie's point, it is kind of intimidating. You're going to go meet a lot of of new folks, and you're hoping other people are similar to yourself. So like, I really appreciated that she came and found me at the baseball game. I think I was the only person there with my two small children sweating. I do also recall it was horrifically hot in July at that baseball game. And so, yeah, it was great. It was nice to have someone at LR1, a friendly face to meet, and then someone to sort of check in with and hold each other accountable and make sure we're both surviving, the next 2 years.
I think maybe an underrated part of an executive MBA program, at least the executive MBA program at Darden, and the relationships that you'll form, the people that you get to know. We talk to so many prospective students who are focused on the content, professional development, the career outcomes. Sydney, were you expecting to get a support system and a network through this? Like, how did that factor into sort of your expectations of your MBA experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brett. So I was certainly had the content in mind, in the context, and the education piece in mind, in the context of the fact that my background and training is all in science. I have no business background acumen wise from like an educational perspective. And so, really was going in, and that was one of the key focuses for me, and certainly wanted to establish a network along the way. I think what I didn't appreciate and what I now very much appreciate is the experiences of others and from different industries, different roles, different backgrounds, different experiences, and how you can pull from their experiences to help you grow yourself as a leader within your career, capturing different perspectives. I knew that Darden has a larger veteran community. But I knew very little. My family's not in the military. And so I've truly valued their experiences in particular as a whole, the way that they approach decision-making strategy, just the cultural dynamic of the military is so different than the corporate world. And so it was really rewarding to hear their experiences and see, like, are there things you can take away from them and others that then I can help to use me grow and develop in my career as a leader, as a manager, et cetera.
Annie, were you expecting to gain this kind of network and support system through your executive MBA experience?
I definitely was, but I think it really exceeded my expectations. To the women in our cohort in particular, it's been such an amazing group of people. I think we've really supported each other along the way and celebrated wins. It hasn't felt competitive. I think Sydney touched on that, maybe noticing that with some other programs that she had applied to. But I think one of the best experiences I've had through this program is building that network, especially the women in our group. We've seen people start families, grow families, switch careers, switch industries, take a moment to have a reset. And it's just been really inspiring to see all of our classmates throughout their journeys. And definitely one of the best parts about the program has been the people and especially the women in this group.
Go back and talk about your MBA decisions, because I can say just from the admissions director's kind of viewpoint, when we talk to men, they sometimes are thinking through things in a particular way. When we talk to women, they're talk about a different set of considerations as they're thinking about taking this step in their career, and some of the things that may be weighing on them as they're making their decision feels a little different than their male counterparts. Annie, were there things that were on your mind as you thought about your MBA decision that maybe held you back or were challenging to you as you thought about taking the step and investing in yourself?
Definitely mom guilt, Brett. It's real. Just a lot of guilt. I think a lot of the women in our group can relate to this. You feel like you're putting yourself first when you shouldn't. Should you be focusing on your children or your family, or you'll be a little bit distracted when it comes to work. But I've always been inspired by my mom in particular. I know Sydney has a similar story where growing up, I just saw this woman who was working her tail off and raising me and my sister. And she was such a, role model to me then. She still is now. Her name is Peggy, if she's listening. She just has always inspired me. And I feel like part of my goal is, of course, to advance in my career and professionally, but it's also to set a really strong example for my two daughters, Maeve and Claire. And so that was a big part of this. It's kind of balancing, knowing that you're going to feel that mom guilt with also really inspiring the people around you. Hopefully that was kind of the goal of mine. And I, it's been tough for them. They're younger kids, so they can't fully wrap their brains around what an MBA program is. But I think they've seen me and others, working really hard towards this. They're so excited to come next weekend to Charlottesville and live it up at the end. But yeah, I think throughout the application process, it's just this weird feeling of guilt where I think a lot of women don't take that leap or that next step. And part of why Sydney and I wanted to talk here today was, sometimes it's important to just do something for yourself. Even if you feel selfish, it'll be worth it. It will benefit the people around you. So that's kind of how I thought about things during the application process, and feel so happy today that I did it.
Sydney, does that resonate with you? Is that something you can relate to?
It is, although I will say, Andy and I talked about this, and I talked about it with others last week at LR2, and I think it's very common for people to say, I feel guilty, have that mom guilt. It's very real. And then I boldly was like, I actually don't feel guilty. And I don't, but for many of the similar reasons that Annie mentioned. So as she alluded to, so my parents were divorced at a very young age. So my mom worked very hard. And I honestly, has been my inspiration, like growing up in those pinnacle years and watching her work. I always looked up to her to be inspiring. I liked, her work ethic was fantastic. She was really driven by her career, very passionate for what she was doing. I never felt like she wasn't at anything as a kid, right? She was always there when she needed to be there. She just also had a career as well. And so, that was something that I grew up into, also wanting, the importance of being an independent woman who can provide for their family. And certainly have a husband, but, wanted to also feel like I had that independence and, ability to provide and support, right? And so it's interesting. So in that sense, I didn't feel guilt doing the MBA, because the MBA is sort of a part of that journey for me to have that, independence and career that I'm striving for, with my mom as an inspiration. But it's funny because along the way, over the past, however many years as I've been pursuing my career, my mom's always mentioned her guilt. And I said, oh, I felt so guilty, when I was working, and if I couldn't make it to this one event, and have you thought about stepping back in your career, so you can have more time with your kids? And as I've told her, I'm like, but you were my inspiration. Like, you worked so hard. It was so inspiring to me. I never felt like you weren't there for me. You were always there. You're always my advocate. So you sort of set me on this path now. I'm wanting to inspire my children to have that same sort of work ethic, independence, passion, if you will. And so I think it's interesting, I challenge people that feel the guilt, because I also would say, look at it from the perspective of your children, and realize that they're looking up to you inspired, and they will use this, great role model and inspiration that you are for them to help them, hopefully be successful in whatever they pursue as they, get older and grow. And so, certainly the guilt is there, and I'm by no means diminishing it, but I also hope that all the moms or dads in the world look out there and realize that you might feel that way, but your kids are truly looking up to you and looking up to you as an inspiration and a role model. And I think that's really important and impactful, and shouldn't be something that we lose sight of. And a reason to drive you to, make 2 years really challenging to pursue an executive MBA, so you can continue to be that inspiration.
Yeah, it's definitely true that the parents' achievement, earning an MBA, I think does change what their kids think that they can go on and do. If you have a parent with an advanced degree, do you think it makes it more likely that your child, your kids may ultimately choose that same path for themselves? Annie, you mentioned this is something you felt, obviously, as you were going through the consideration process. Did it stay with you during the program? How did you work through those feelings of guilt?
It remained throughout, Brett. But I think it got a little bit easier to manage. I think Sydney and I are both incredibly lucky to have supportive families and husbands that can hold down the fort while we're away. And I'm so grateful for my husband, especially for my own journey. But yeah, I think the guilt remains. I think it becomes a little bit easier to manage, but it still kind of hung out there for me. Just some missing bedtime for some night classes, missing some weekends. But I think it has gotten better for sure. And I still would do it all over again, because I do think we're setting a strong example for our kids and others. My daughter the other day told me that she wanted to be the president. I'm like, dream big. That's a tough shoes to fill. So I do think, even though they're young, they're seeing this, and they talk about it in their school. They're excited to come to graduation. So it's absolutely worth it. And I would encourage any woman out there thinking of applying, thinking it might be too much, just to kind of take that leap, because outside of our support systems within our families, just the support system we had at school, especially with all the women again that we were experiencing this with together, just has been incredibly helpful and really got me through.
So Sydney, I'm curious, do you think this is something that's sort of unique to moms going through an MBA experience? Or do you think this is something that all parents ultimately feel? Do you think there's a kind of gender dynamic at play? I mentioned I started this conversation by just saying we do get different questions from dads and moms, oftentimes, or men and women looking at our MBA program. So what's your thought on that?
Right, you're bringing the tough questions here. No, I think it's an excellent point. It's interesting. During the beginning of LR2, in one of the opening sessions, one of the dads, was one of the men in our cohort, did reference the fact that he felt guilty as well. I do. That's a tough question. I think inherently, if you looked at the class dynamics, probably most of the women in their program, regardless of having children or not, probably have, and if they have a spouse, probably have a spouse with a career as well. I know Annie and I both do. I don't know that it's necessarily the same. I know before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about, maybe more traditional gender roles still living on in many households across the country. And so, I think that probably does apply to some extent as well in our cohort. But I think if you're a parent, it's probably natural to feel some sort of guilt. I also would argue that everyone probably feels either guilt or stress in some capacity. I know I said I don't feel guilt. I definitely felt a lot of stress because when you layer in an executive MBA already into whatever else is on your plate, you have to start making decisions of like, well, if I'm going to prep for this class, I can't go to my kid's soccer game, or I can't, if you don't have kids, I can't go out and get drinks with my friends. So you're already having to make sacrifices more so than I think you would have if you didn't have the executive MBA on the plate. And that can either come out as guilt, stress, or any of those other emotions. And I think everyone in a cohort feels that. But disproportionately, I would say I think women probably carry more guilt and that feeling when they're, having to make choices to spend less time with their kids. Because I think inherently we do a lot at home, whether or not everyone has careers. So to your point, yes.
Annie, what's your reaction to that question?
Definitely agree with Sydney. I think it, of course, varies from person to person, but overall, maybe statistically speaking, I think women feel more of that. But again, we have many men in our program who we've had conversations with where it's just tough to be away from your families or your loved ones, at times throughout the program. But again, I do think it's worth it. And just having the support system that we did really made it a lot easier. And I commend all of the spouses that have helped our entire group kind of get this through, because it is a burden that they're taking on as well to see us kind of achieve this milestone.
So I think one of the things that's kind of come up in this conversation is like, well, you have all these feelings, and ultimately at the end of the day, you decided to move forward with the program, and you feel like on balance, the program has been a real benefit to you. Annie, when you think about the sort of impact of the program for you, like what stands out? What jumps out to you?
I think a lot of things. Again, maybe 75% of my decision was based on, meeting this goal for myself, doing something for myself, doing something that was hard that maybe I had put off for too long, and wanting to kind of seize the moment during it was actually a pretty chaotic time in my life. And I was like, let's just apply. Let's just see what happens. And then things kind of built. Brett, you wowed me during the recruiting process. And it's just been great. But I think, I just, in terms of career growth here, I think aside from the personal, just what it's done professionally, I feel like a more confident leader. I feel like I can strategize better. I work for an asset manager, but I'm not on the investment team. So I'm seeing research notes fling around. And after our deep dives in accounting and finance and other quantitative courses, I feel like I can understand that a lot better and kind of think bigger, if that makes sense, when it comes to solving problems and trying to consider growing a business or growing a team and mentoring others. So I think it's had a ton of wonderful impacts I didn't necessarily expect at the beginning, because it was kind of a personal, almost felt like a selfish thing. I'm going to do this for me. And I feel like it's really benefited me in different areas of my life. So I'm very grateful for that.
Sydney, how about for you? What's been, the impact of the program?
I talked some already about the network, which I think has been absolutely fantastic. And just getting to know everyone has been wonderful. To Annie's point too, an MBA, I never wanted to do a full-time MBA. I mean, before even doing an MBA, I was like wildly educated already with a PhD and doing a postdoc. But because I've had that inherent curiosity of being, the business side of a corporation, have gone back and forth at many points over the last 10 to 15 years of, should I go back and do an MBA? What should that look like? And it did get to the point where finally, as a geriatric millennial, was like, if I don't do this now, will I ever do it? And will I regret it? And when I was like, yes, I'll regret it, I was like, I want to make this choice. I want to see where I can take my career. I want to be a climber. And so, it's kind of like do it now or don't. And so that's sort of what was the drive to be like, okay, start mapping out what programs do I want to look at? What am I looking for? I will say, Brett, you touched on the case-based method earlier in our conversation. And while I hadn't highlighted it yet, that was a big driver in my decision between the various programs I looked at. I didn't, at the end of the day, I didn't want to go to class and just be lectured at for hours on end. I wanted to be able to hear from my classmates, have discussions. And don't get me wrong, case-based method in DA class about did me in. We spent 45 minutes down one path to basically learn that our path was the wrong path. And I was, frantically taking my notes. I hadn't been in a stats class in like 2 decades. I was like, oh, this is making sense. And then it was like, nope, wrong path, folks. Let's try again. And I was like, wait a second, case-based method just might put me under the table. But now looking back completely on it, I think it really helps drive the discussion. I think it makes you a more well-rounded person in your career. I think it gets you to think better strategically. I think it is going to help us all be better leaders. And so, that is something that, while I wouldn't say I 100% prioritized up front, was something I'm very appreciative, and I'm glad that I had that path with Darden.
Annie, I want to come back to something that you said about you just decided to apply. You just decided to put yourself out there. We talk to so many prospective students who I think can often come up with many, many reasons as to why they shouldn't apply, why it's not the right time, why they should wait. Like, what ultimately put you over sort of like into that I'm just going to apply mode? Because I mean, again, when people have a lot on their plate, it's a lot easier to put off an executive MBA or pursuing an MBA than it is to do it.
Yeah, I also had kind of a now or never moment like Sydney. I really wanted to kind of knock this out before I turned 40, to be totally honest. And I felt like I had put it off for long enough. It's like enough is enough. We talked about the guilt, and sometimes it's good to be a little selfish and do something for yourself. So I think it was late 2022, actually around the holidays. And I was like, let's just open up this application and see what comes out. And a lot of what I talked about then was in my application was about the women in my life who have supported me so much, and the inspiration, and just that kind of continued to motivate me as I was looking at my younger girls. But it felt like a now or never moment. We also have women in our program who paused for multiple decades, and this year are graduating alongside their young daughters who are also graduating from high school and college. So, it's okay to do stuff for yourself. It's okay to be a little selfish sometimes. And it's really never too late to do this. We see people across all, a lot of different ages taking a moment for themselves to do this. So I've been really inspired by those women too, who took an even longer break or started to pursue this, but held back because of that guilt they were feeling and the time that they thought that they had to spend with their family, prioritizing that against, over themselves maybe. So they still went ahead and did it, and they really inspired me too. But it felt like now or never, Brett. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off, apply, and kind of take it from there. But I was really excited after attending one of the classes in person and throughout the recruiting process. And again, it really just kind of drew me in, and I'm very, very happy that we move forward with it.
Sydney, can you relate to that sort of now or never kind of feeling?
Yes. It completely was now or never. And I think Annie brought up a good point. It's so easy. And I think Brett, you said this too. I feel like it's so easy to say like, oh, not this year. It's busy, or it could be busy, and you can find a reason and excuse. But I would tell anyone who's even thinking about it, there's no harm in attending a session, to learn more about the program, open the application, apply, at least have the conversation with your manager. My manager, when I applied, was completely supportive of me applying to an MBA program. And it was my manager when I was in medical affairs. And so we had very open conversations where I was like, I do the MBA. I'm not going to stay in medical affairs, and he was so supportive of it. And so I think, you kind of just have to rip that Band-Aid off and try. I think there's always opportunities. I know we had a couple of classmates that started or delayed a year. And so you have those choices. But I think the biggest hurdle, to Annie's point, is like opening the application and getting started. And I would argue to anyone considering it to do that and to start and to even just apply. And then you can always decide after the fact if you need to wait a year, because life is really challenging right now. But, I'd hate for people to just have to get stuck and never do it because they could come up with reasons to just not open the application, right? So I'm a big advocate for people to at least go through the process, and would love for more women to go through the process and think about it and, really get in, have those conversations and try and problem solve and find ways to advocate for themselves and make it work with their families or everything else going on, then kind of wonder, should I have ever done that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think oftentimes people feel like when you're applying, you have to already have your mind made up. And we really encourage candidates to think about the application process as just an extension of the research process. You're not committing to anything. You're just trying to find out if this school could be an option for you. And yes, it takes work, it takes time to put an application together, but I do think that process of going through, talking about your story, your motivations here can really help clarify things for you too. So, I recognize that people kind of maybe view that as like an escalation in their MBA process, but the reality is you're still kind of trying to figure out, is this what you want to do? You're still exploring at that point, and I think that's a great point, Sydney. So, Sydney, what are you looking forward to in the coming months? What are you excited about?
Well, let's see. We're getting everyone's like, you're getting 20, 30 hours back in your week. Like, are you going to take time for yourself? And I will have a trip planned at the end of the month with some friends to go to Key Largo to celebrate my 40th birthday and graduation, which is great. But no, it's a really exciting time for us at work. We're actually hopefully getting approval for a drug here in the upcoming weeks. So that's my acute priority. But then following that, I've promised my kids I'm going to learn how to golf. I attempted to take a couple lessons the past couple of years. My coach was less than enthused by doing my homework because I was doing other homework during the time. So I'm going to try and pick up golf. Spend more time with my family. It's going to be nice to just, not have to make choices, as I alluded to earlier. Like, if I do this, I can't do that. And so which one am I going to make? I think my plate will still be full, but isn't going to be unmanageable. And so I'm appreciating being able to take that time and reallocate it back into some other things that I enjoy doing.
How about you, Annie? What are you looking forward to?
I totally agree with Sydney. There's a lot of TV to catch up on also, Brett. I feel like there's so many series I've missed out on. I'm really excited to kind of just take a beat and take the summer to reflect and reset a bit, spend a lot of time with the family. I'm actually going to the Cowboy Carter concert with several women in the cohort. You're invited, Brett. You're invited too, Sydney, if you're going to take the train down. But, just taking a moment to kind of breathe. I think Sydney and I are lucky that we're both considered climbers and staying within our industries and at our firms. So there's a lot of people out there who are starting new ventures and switching industries. And I feel very grateful that just have a little bit of time to take for myself and spend it with those around me. So I'm very much looking forward to the summer.
Yeah, that's exciting. Cowboy Carter concert. I still think about that Netflix halftime show from
Wasn't it so
back.
good?
It was amazing, incredible. How'd you like to be some of those really famous people who just showed up for like 15 seconds on camera, like your Post Malone, Shabuzis of the world, and they were just briefly on the camera, then that's it. But you know what?
That's my next goal, Brett, to make it into a Beyonce video. But it'll be fun to kind of keep those relationships alive. I think, again, that's been one of the best things about the program is just the people and the network and being able to continue that even beyond the classroom. So I'm excited.
Well, the two of you have shared a lot of advice and kind of insights. Annie, what would be your sort of final piece of advice, something that you would encourage the listeners who are tuning in for this podcast? It's going to be more than two people, I'll just say. But the people who are tuning in, listening to this, what would you encourage them to think about as they think about their own MBA journeys?
Are we up to 4 listeners? We'll take it. We'll double our stats. I think it's just, similar to Sydney and I's journey. There's no perfect time to do this. If you're thinking about it, just in the name of Nike, just do it, just try it, just apply, see what happens. I think it's good, especially for women, to sometimes be a little selfish and do things for themselves. So if you're thinking about the program, especially Darden, talk to Brett, talk to others, visit a class. It'll be totally worth it. And it'd be wonderful to have more women applying, more women in the classroom, more female voices is kind of one of the reasons we wanted to talk here today. And just looking forward to the future and very, very proud of Sydney and I and the rest of our cohort and making it through the last 2 years.
Yeah, I love that advice about just taking sort of small steps to kind of engage with. You think this is what you'd like to do? Come for a class visit, join us for a webinar, just things to kind of test this hypothesis of, I'm curious about an executive MBA program. Is this something I'd like to do? And it's really, that's all you have. It's just an very easy way to think about it is like not really committing to anything. You're just kind of researching, exploring, even again, the application process is part of that. Sydney, final piece of advice for our listeners?
Apply. Please apply, especially to the women. I really can't stress it enough. I feel like the one thing I've taken aside from, the MBA business acumen, the broader network, the one thing I've really taken away from this is the support system and the network that we formed as women in the cohort. I've always been in very male dominated industries where it's like one woman on a team, there's only one at the table. And so I'm leaving this program now a huge advocate for women. I think women need to be collaborative with one another, pull a chair up for another woman at the table, mentor and bring women with them as they grow in their careers. And so I am happy for, if we can get up to like 6 listeners, those 6 listeners can reach out to me at any time. I'd love to be either their support system, the person they talk to about the executive MBA, someone to, work through with them, like how can they handle the logistics? I want to be an advocate and a support system to any woman considering an MBA, an executive MBA, to both help them, apply, survive the MBA program, and just, since it's something that they would want to do, something to do for themselves, as Annie mentioned. So I think, my big hope and my big piece of advice, or ask of women is if you're thinking about doing an MBA, please consider it. Please reach out to any of the women. Reach out to Brett. Brett, you can connect them with us. I think hopefully Annie also would field calls, to help prospective women students who might be interested in doing an MBA, but just concerned about the life logistics that come with it. I think we would love to see more women in the executive MBA program. We talked about it in our final deliverable after LR2. And so, if this podcast is a way to also kick that off and make our 5-year sort of future vision come true, then I'm here to advocate for that and see more women in the program.
Well, Annie, Sydney, thank you so much for your time and for reaching out and wanting to come on the podcast and sharing your stories. I think there was a lot of great insight today of things that our prospective students, particularly women considering our executive MBA program, may be wrestling with as they think about taking the step for themselves. And so, thank you both and congratulations again. Look forward to seeing you at graduation.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Brett.
That was my conversation with Annie McCormick and Sydney Stoops, 2 students in our Executive MBA class of 2025. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.